Welcome back to the 127 Fit podcast. Today's guest is a personal trainer. He is also the co-founder of Mind Pump Media and co-host of Mind Pump, an online radio podcast that is dedicated to providing truthful fitness and health information. Today's guest is Sal Di Stefano. Sal, welcome to the 127 Fit podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
For sure, Sal. So we're just going to dive right into things. I've got 4 questions I kind of like to start all of my podcasts with. The first question I have for you is, how do you start your day? Do you have a specific routine or ritual you like to stick to on most mornings?
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing I do when I get up is, of course, I use the restroom. And then I get myself set up for the day with my lunch and my breakfast. I work out first thing in the morning, typically on an empty stomach. So I'll typically have some caffeine with some theanine. I might throw some inositol in there, maybe a little citrulline. Usually it's just caffeine and theanine. Then I come here to work, and we have a gym that we use for filming, but it's functional. And I'll do my workout. And I like to start my day this way because I find myself better on the podcast, and it helps me stay consistent. I'm a father of 3 kids, entrepreneur. If I don't start my day with a workout, I find that I end up missing quite a few workouts. So first thing in the morning, it's usually about 6:30 a.m. that I start my training.
Excellent. And just really quick with that, because I know you've been training clients and people for years and years now, is that kind of something ideally, if you can get a client to start their day off with movement or some sort of workout or exercise, is that kind of ideally what you try to encourage people and your clients specifically with?
I do, but here's the thing. There's such an individual variance in terms of when people like to exercise and what works best for them. So in the past, if somebody asked me, hey, what's the best time to work out? I might've said, oh, first thing in the morning, because studies show that people are more consistent. And my experience running gyms is, the 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. crowd is extremely consistent, especially in comparison to the evening crowd or afternoon crowd. But I learned, I learned better as I became more experienced as a trainer. And so now I just say to people, well, what time do you prefer to work out? And we'll stick with that. But if all things are equal, I think you'll find that starting out your day with a workout dramatically increases the consistency. If you wait till later, again, all things being equal, oftentimes things can get in the way, whether it be work or other obligations, or you start to feel tired, or your day, kind of gets away from you. Starting the day out that way tends to make it something that you don't miss. But again, it has to be all things equal. Some people simply hate working out in the morning. They just don't feel good doing it, in which case I'd say find the time that works best for you.
Awesome. All right. The second question here, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, or word?
Gosh, I love some of the quotes that you'll find it's in Stoicism. I don't have any specifics, but I do like the focus on, where you focus on what you can change and accept what you can't. I think this is a valuable lesson in life, but it's also a lesson you learn in fitness and in health. When you're working out, oftentimes we're motivated to change our bodies. We want to sculpt our bodies or lose weight or look a particular way or achieve a certain level of performance. And you quickly learn as you become consistent long-term that you might not have the genetics that someone else has. You might not look like the person that you're emulating, whether it be the bodybuilder or the fitness professional or the model or the celebrity. And in order to stay consistent, you have to accept the fact that you have your own body structure, your own tendencies. You may not be as fast or as strong as professional athletes. You might not play basketball as good as a professional basketball player, but you'll accept that. And then you'll focus on what you can change. And that's a great lesson for anything in life. We all have a potential, and this part of this potential is determined by uncontrollable factors, maybe how you grew up, the parents that you had, your genetics, access to good food, access to good exercise equipment, et cetera, et cetera. But within that potential, there's quite a range. And the choices that you make and the things that you can control determine whether or not you meet your upper potential or whether or not you hit that lower part of your potential. And, I've that lesson has served me well in business as well. accepting what you can't change and focusing on what you can. It's a great life lesson.
Absolutely. That's powerful stuff. The third question here is a part of the warm-up question, Sal. Is there a book or podcast that has been especially impactful in your life? And for you, because of your experience and everything, and I know you guys with your podcast, I would love it if you would just maybe share with the listeners of the 127 Fit podcast, maybe a book that's been impactful. And then outside of your own podcast, has there been any podcasts that have been impactful, or maybe influential is a better word in terms of a podcast?
Yeah, I really like Arthur Brooks. He hosts the podcast, The Art of Happiness. Brilliant, brilliant man, Harvard professor. He produced the documentary, The Pursuit. He's an expert on happiness, on what it takes to really achieve joy and happiness in life. And listening to his podcast has brought me a great deal of value. My wife also, she's super obsessed with it. So I love him. I love what he has to say and what he has to do. And then this isn't necessarily a podcast. It's just something I enjoyed watching, and it had a profound impact on me. This individual is a bit of a mentor to me, not in real life. I never met this person. In fact, they're not alive anymore, but just through their work. I loved watching Free to Choose on YouTube by Milton Friedman. He was a Nobel Prize winning economist, and he communicates very effectively to the average person on the impacts of markets and voluntary exchange, and has nothing to do with fitness, but it's just something I love watching and learning from. And it's an old series, still extremely relevant. So I highly recommend it.
Excellent. Is there a book at some point, Sal, that was kind of impactful or memorable in your mind as I asked that?
Gosh, Eckhart Tolle writes some really good stuff. I guess you could classify him as a spiritual leader or a philosopher. A New Earth was really, really good. I loved what he said in that book. And he's got other books you can read. So if you're into personal growth, which if you're into fitness, whether you realize it or not, you are into personal growth, check out some of his stuff. He's also got a lot of videos on YouTube.
Excellent. All right. To kind of wrap up the warm-up questions here, what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Oh boy. One piece of advice I'd give my younger self. You don't know what you don't know. And I think that's good because, and I keep learning this lesson, now as a 42-year-old man, if I look back to when I was 22, I definitely thought I knew everything at 22. And of course, 20 years later, I realized I knew very little. And I'm sure that that's still the same. I'm sure a 62-year-old me would say the same thing about 42-year-old me. So wisdom goes a long way. Wisdom is more valuable than knowledge, which is just knowing information. And so I think that's important to know. Keep you humble, and to always keep your mind open.
Excellent. Now, I want to kind of transition. We're gonna because of our time today. I like to kind of get into my guest backstory, but you recently came out with a book. For all the listeners that are going to be watching this on YouTube, the Resistance Training Revolution. It's right here. I got a copy myself. I'm pretty deep into it, but I actually heard you on another podcast talking about the book, Sal. And obviously I've listened to your guys' podcast for years now and have followed you guys on social media. But I heard you talking about this book, and I own a gym. I'm a personal trainer, kind of huge into the fitness industry, compete in bodybuilding and stuff. And when I heard you talking about this book that you recently came out with, I was like, I really want Sal to come on my podcast and talk about this, because resistance training, strength training, I personally believe it's where it's at. Right. And then basically you came out with a book that kind of just, backs everything up that I share with clients, potential clients, gym members, and things like that. So we're going to change things up a little bit. I've got kind of just 3 topics that I want to hit on that kind of stood out to me from your book as I've read through it. The first thing is I just kind of want you to expound on the cardio myth. That's kind of something early on in the book you kind of talk about. And I just want to read something, just a quick paragraph, and then I'm going to let you kind of just run with it and explain it and break it down a little bit. But you say here, it's on page 4 of the Resistance Training Revolution. As I emphasize in the introduction, focusing on cardio activity for fat loss is a fantastic way to fail at fat loss. Before I explain the reason for my shocking statement, let's have a heart-to-heart talk about cardio exercise and why it does not work as well as you might think. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and I just want you to kind of explain that paragraph and what the cardio myth is in terms of fat loss and anything else you want to share.
Yes. Now, before I get into this, I do want to be clear to your viewers and listeners that all forms of exercise, all forms of activity, so long as they're applied appropriately, and that's very important, right? You can overdo any form of exercise or apply it in a way that is inappropriate for your body, your fitness level, your mobility. So all forms of exercise in that context have tremendous value. They all have value. Okay. So that being said, the problem with cardio is that the paradigm that we've been sold to solve our obesity epidemic or to solve our fat gain problems, which this is a modern world problem, right? Obesity was never an issue. You go back 100 years ago, this wasn't a big thing. Now it's the #1 killer. It leads to so many other diseases and disorders that are chronic, including things like cancers and heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia. I mean, the list goes on and on. It accounts for a majority of the deaths in, for example, in America, but also in all modern societies. The old paradigm was totally wrong, and it's caused a lot of problems. It's one of the reasons why we have such a high fail rate. You know, in America alone, we don't have a weight loss problem. We really don't. You know, tens of millions of people lose weight every single year. The problem is they gain it back and then some. So what we have is a keep weight off or stay lean problem. The fail rate is something north of 85%. I would argue it's probably even higher. So it's terrible. So what's the issue here? Well, here's what happened, right? So in order to lose weight, and this part's true, you have to take in less calories than you burn. This is actually a law of physics. Okay. It's the second law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Calories are energy. If your calories coming in, your energy coming in matches the calories that are being burned, you gain no weight and you lose no weight. If the calories are higher than you burn, you gain weight. And if they're lower, you lose weight. So this is a fact. Okay. So what's the problem then? The problem is the exercise side of this equation has been sold to us completely wrong. So because we know if you burn more calories than you take in, you'll lose weight, we've taken all forms of exercise and we've placed them in order in value. And the way that we value them is how many calories they burn while you do them. This is how we value all forms of exercise, or at least mainstream, right? So it's always, hey, do this form of exercise, you burn tons of calories. This form of exercise burns the most amount of calories. I mean, heck, you own a gym, cardio machines will even tell you how many calories are being burned, which, by the way, they're super inaccurate and they actually lie. But nonetheless, it's a selling point because we've been told that we need to manually burn all these calories, and this is how exercise is valuable. Now, the problem with that is that's completely false. In fact, if we were to list the values that exercise or activity provide us, the calories burned while performing the activity is at the bottom. It's actually not important at all. The top of the list is, how does this form of exercise get my body to adapt? Okay. How does it get my body to adapt and change? And then what does that mean? So the reason why you get better at a form of exercise is because your body adapts. Your body aims at getting better at whatever you're doing. So if you start running, and let's say you never run and you go to start running around the block is going to be very difficult for you. It's going to be very challenging. But if you stay consistent, eventually you can run around 2 blocks and then half a mile and then a mile and so on. You get better at it, right? The same thing is true for resistance training or strength training. You work out with weights or machines or even body weight. And at first, maybe, 3 push-ups is hard, but eventually through practice, you can do 5 push-ups and 10 push-ups and so on. What the heck is going on here? Why are we getting better at these forms of activity? Well, your body views exercise as a stress. Okay. Running hurts your lungs and makes your legs tired. working out with weights or body weight makes your muscles sore, makes you tired. Your body says, this is a stress. We need to adapt so that this insult, right, what's happening to us, no longer stresses us out, right? Our bodies are adaptation machines. You handle rough objects, you develop calluses. You go out in the sun, you start to get a tan, right? So this is all an adaptation process. Okay, so let's look at the adaptation process and let's focus on cardio for a second and see what's happening to our bodies. Cardiovascular activity requires, if our bodies get good at it, requires endurance, very little strength, and it also requires one more thing, efficiency of calories burned. Now, why? Because cardiovascular activity, while you're doing it, does burn a significant amount of calories, at least in comparison to other forms of exercise. And your body's always trying to get better at what it's doing. So it says, okay, we need stamina. We don't need much strength. And let's figure out a way to burn less calories because we want to get better at doing this while using less energy. Now, here's a little side note. Why would your body want to get more efficient at calorie burn? Well, for most of human history, for the vast majority of human history, 99% of the time that modern humans, or at least the modern body, has been on Earth, calories have been very difficult to come by. It wasn't easy. Up until recently, food was scarce. Most of our time was devoted around finding food and finding calories. So our bodies got very good at becoming efficient. In fact, there's a study, there's actually several studies, but the one that I quote in the book, what was done on modern hunter-gatherers in northern Tanzania. They're called the Hadza tribe. So if you want to look this up, it's Hadza, Hadza tribe. And what scientists did, and remember, these are hunter-gatherers, so they live the way that humans lived 100,000 years ago, right? They don't have electronics. They don't have, gas-powered engines. They gather roots, nuts, seeds, fruit, if they can find it. But they get a majority of their calories from hunting. And most hunts are not successful, and it's very difficult to kill a large animal. And the way they hunt is the way that we probably hunted 1,000 years ago, is we see an animal, we stalk it, we have a spear in our hand, we throw the spear at the animal, we wound it, and then we run after it until it gets tired. Really two things that humans do very well in comparison to other animals is we throw with accuracy, and we can actually out-trek almost any animal. This is true. Now, I know it's hard to believe because most of us are really out of shape, but a human can out-trek pretty much any animal. We have a great way of conserving energy. We can cool our bodies down by sweating. We can breathe quite well while we're running. Other animals, they have to stop, catch their breath, cool down. And when they do, especially if they're wounded, then we sprint and we kill them. So lots of activity. Modern hunter-gatherers, these Hadza people, they're moving like crazy. And so scientists went down to study their metabolisms through some pretty sophisticated testing. They said, okay, let's see how many calories they're burning on a daily basis. And here's what they found. At the end of the study, modern hunter-gatherers, the Hadza tribes people, were burning roughly the same amount of calories as the average Western couch potato. So, John, who sits on his couch most of the time and drives to work and works on a computer, burns right around the same amount of calories as a Hadza tribes person who never sits down and runs after animals until they get tired enough to kill. Okay. Now that sounds crazy on its surface. How is that even possible? Well, it doesn't make any sense that our bodies would allow us to continuously burn 10,000 calories a day when food was scarce. We wouldn't be here if this was the case. So the body can become extremely efficient. And one of the ways it does this is it pares down muscle. Okay. When you look at studies that take cardio plus diet, when they take people and they say, okay, we're going to have them cut their calories and we're going to have them do cardio and we're going to see how they lose weight. When we look at the weight loss, what we typically see is roughly 50% of the weight lost comes from muscle, right? So 10-pound weight loss, 5 pounds is lean body mass, 5 pounds is body fat. Now, why is this a bad thing? Well, number one, they're really roughly the same body fat percentage they were before. They're just a smaller, same flabbiness version of themselves. But here's the second part that's really crappy. they have a slower metabolism. Muscle is expensive from a calorie standpoint. It takes a lot of energy to maintain muscle. It takes very little energy to maintain body fat. So when you do cardio plus diet, although you lose weight, remember half of it being muscle, you also slow your metabolism down. So here's what that old paradigm, right, that we've been sold, the cut your calories plus do lots of cardio, right, 30 to 60 minutes of vigorous cardiovascular activity. Here's what that ends up looking like. And I guarantee you a good majority of the people watching this or listening to this have experienced this. You start right here and you initially lose weight very quickly. Oh, wow, the scale went down 10 pounds or 12 pounds. Then you plateau real hard. And then you're stuck with this conundrum. I got to cut my calories even more, or I got to do even more activity. And maybe you do that. Maybe you're really determined. Okay, I'm doing 3 days a week of cardio. I'm going to do 5 days a week of cardio. And then you lose a little more weight and then you plateau again. Okay, I'm going to cut my calories even more. And then you lose a little bit more weight, but then you plateau again. Okay, I'm going to bump my activity even more, cut my calories even more. Eventually, what you're left with is 20-pound, 30-pound weight loss, a lot of it being muscle, and your metabolism is significantly slower than where you started. So now, in order to maintain this weight loss, you're eating way less calories than you did when you started, and you're also much more active. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that this is very difficult to sustain and maintain, especially because being active every single day for most people requires structured exercise. You know, our days and our lives are just not active. We sit down most of the time. The average person takes, I don't know, 4,000 steps a day, which is like I don't know how many miles, a mile or something like that, a mile and a half walk. So now you're in this crazy position. I got to do 30 to 60 or more minutes every day of structured exercise. And I have to eat really low calories forever to maintain my body. Not going to happen, not going to work. Then I eventually stop, gain all the weight back, typically don't gain the muscle back. Now I'm in a worse position than I was before. I'm fatter again, heavier again, with a slower metabolism the way I started. And if you continue to rinse and repeat the cycle, you end up in the scenario where you're 50 pounds overweight with the metabolism that is extremely slow, where if you just eat a little bit extra, you gain body fat. And now you're like, man, this is really weird. Just going off my diet in the slightest bit gets me to gain all kinds of weight. Very hard to maintain. Okay, so now let's look at the alternative. How can we take this, burn more calories than I take in or take in less calories than I burn scenario? And how can I take the exercise portion and figure out a way to make this more sustainable? Let's look at resistance training. Now, I want to be clear. Resistance training isn't just exercising with resistance. I can use weights in a way that makes it just like cardio. So it's not just using resistance. It's using resistance in a specific way to gain muscle and strength. Okay, so the goal is build muscle, get stronger. So typically what this looks like is I do a set of an exercise, 10 repetitions. The intensity is relatively high. The weight is relatively heavy in an appropriate way, right, for myself. I rest for a minute or two in between sets, and then I repeat. This is how you build strength and you build muscle. You cut the rest out and it just becomes cardio. So I want to be very clear with that. So let's say you do strength training or resistance training as part of this formula. Well, here's what it looks like. Initially, the weight loss is much slower, mainly because I don't lose any muscle. In fact, especially when I first get started, I gain muscle at the same time. So I might not even show weight loss on the scale, but what might have happened is I might have lost 5 pounds of body fat and gained 3 to 5 pounds of muscle. So the scale says, oh, I only lost 2 pounds or I lost no pounds, but I've done this transfer of fat and muscle. By the way, muscle takes up much less space than body fat. So if you're watching or listening to this right now, and I could magically take 5 pounds of body fat off your body and replace it with 5 pounds of muscle, you would be much smaller. Your waist would be smaller. Your thighs or your butt might be, leaner, more toned. So you would look like you lost weight, but in reality, the weight might not have budged. But here's the beautiful part about this. That extra 5 pounds of muscle and the signal that I'm sending my body that says get stronger is speeding up my metabolism. When you tell the body to prioritize strength and muscle, it doesn't try to become more efficient with calories, especially when you supplement it with a high protein kind of muscle building diet. You speed up your metabolism. Here's what weight loss looks like when resistance training is part of that formula. It starts off slow, and then it starts to snowball. And the snowball effect kicks in as my metabolism ramps up. Over time, I get leaner and leaner and leaner, and I can inevitably end up in a situation where my metabolism is faster than it was when I first started. So imagine this. You lose 20 pounds of body fat, you gain a little bit of muscle, you look way better, by the way. Muscle looks very sculpted. In women, it provides nice curves. In men, of course, it gives them a much nicer looking physique, a stronger looking physique. But now I'm eating more than I did before. Now I can eat more and maintain my leaner body. Oh, and one more side note. Here's another part of resistance training that's amazing. I don't have to do it every single day. In fact, I recommend you don't do it every single day, especially if you're not super advanced with your training. The average person will get phenomenal results from what I'm talking about, from 2 to 3 days a week of good, well-programmed, appropriate resistance training. That's part of the beauty of it, is I don't have to do it every single day. Just do it enough to tell my body to speed up its metabolism and build some muscle. And there's a lot more that goes into that, because we could talk about how it affects your hormones and your brain and health parameters. But just from a fat loss standpoint, nothing comes close to the effects, especially the long-term effects of proper resistance training.
Awesome. All right. So something else I want to touch on here quickly. In the book, you talk about like practicing movements and not working out.
Yeah.
So can you just kind of, and when I read that, it kind of hit me, and that's why I want to bring it up to you. And I want you to kind of just break that down and explain that. So like, what does it mean when you talk about practicing movement or exercise as opposed to not just working out?
Yeah. So you're a trainer, you own a gym. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, years ago, this really hit me. I was hiking up in the hills here in California. So I live in the Silicon Valley, and there's some really nice foothills. And I was up there just doing a hike, and every once in a while, somebody would pass me up and would run. They'd be running. Now, as a trainer, and I've been a trainer now for over 2 decades, I probably, 24 years. It's hard for me not to notice people's biomechanics when they're doing things. It's wired into me, right? So I could, as people run by, I notice, oh my gosh, that person's feet are pronating, right? They're turning in, or wow, they have a really strong anterior pelvic tilt, right? Their low back is curved up. That's going to cause back pain. Oh my God, their shoulders are forward. So I just noticed these things. And every single person that was running by, I was cringing, because I knew that they're going to hurt if they stay consistent with the way that they were running. And then out of nowhere, this guy runs by me, and he was like a gazelle. I mean, he was running beautifully. His feet were striking the ground properly. He had great ankle mobility, foot strength, great core stability. And I could tell that this was somebody who is a professional. I mean, they were just gliding. And I could see that this person, not only do they not hurt, but running to them probably feels incredible. Not just the fitness part, but just the way that their body moved. And I thought to myself, you know, humans evolved to run. You know, I said this earlier, 2 things that humans do very well is we throw with accuracy, and we can run exceptionally well. Now, this doesn't mean, and don't take this for granted, that you're just going to go run and you're going to run well. We don't run anymore. I mean, most people stopped running right around the age of 10. Okay. So like anything, you lose that skill. I mean, if you stopped walking for 5 years and you sat in a chair for 5 years, you wouldn't be able to walk very well when you got up. So what's the problem? Why the heck are we running so terribly? Well, the problem is when people decide that they're going to start running, they lace up their shoes and then they go outside and then they run till they get tired, because their mentality is, this is a workout. They don't think to themselves, this is a skill that I need to perfect, right? Now, if we counter that with another skill, imagine if somebody said, I'm going to start playing golf. Well, they would treat it very much like a skill. They'd go to the range. They'd probably hire a coach. They'd perfect their stroke. They wouldn't just grab a golf club and swing as hard as they could until they got tired. Most of us know that's a terrible approach. You've never learned how to play golf. You're just swinging a golf club until you get tired. But this is how we approach exercise. We don't think to ourselves, I'm going to perfect this movement. We think, I'm going to work out my legs, or I'm going to work out my shoulders, or I'm going to get really tired. Now, the problem with that is, number one, you don't develop the skill, which takes time. It takes time to perfect a skill, just like I said with golf or any other sport. And number two, you have bad movement patterns. You don't have a good skill in the technique. And on top of that, you're going until you fatigue, which it will guarantee that your skill and your technique are out the window, right? Because you're going till you're tired. When you fatigue, the first thing that goes out the window is your technique. Your body will revert to moving in its most efficient way, which is terrible because, again, this is not something you practice. So here's what I communicate to people. When you go work out, and this is true for any form of exercise, but resistance training is the form that I tend to communicate the most. Rather than thinking to yourself, I'm training my arms, or I'm training my legs, or I'm training my back, think to yourself, I'm going to perfect the squat. I'm going to perfect this press. I'm going to perfect this row. Now, why is this better? Well, number one, you're not worried about whether or not your legs get tired, or your back gets tired, or your arms get tired, or your shoulders get tired. What you're worried about is the skill. You're perfecting the skill, the side effect of which is better movement patterns and a much more effective workout. Now, one of the good things about resistance training is, at the very least, among all forms of exercise, I think technique and form is communicated more ardently, or it's, at least we tend to communicate it more fervently when it comes to resistance training than other forms of exercise. When someone talks to you about working out with weights or machines or bands or your body weight, they tend to say, make sure you have perfect form. Here's a skill. Here's a technique. With cardio, not so much. It's like, go for a run, just go for a swim, go for a bike, right? Bike ride. But with resistance training, we tend to do that. But I really emphasize this, exercises have a potential. It could either be really effective at getting you fit and strong, or it can hurt you. What determines that potential is your technique and your form and how you apply it. So if we treat exercise like practicing a skill versus like working out, we're so much better off. Your form and technique are better. Your intensity is appropriate because you stop. Once your form goes bad, if you're perfecting your skill, you stop, which is what I tell people to do anyway. Hey, when your technique starts to go south, that's the end of the set. If you're trying to perfect the skill and practice the skill, that's what ends up happening. So the results are just much better. And when I started communicating this to clients, it was like night and day. The results just were incredible because people practiced versus working out.
Awesome. All right. So the last thing that I kind of want to touch on from your book, Sal, and you kind of just brought up the word intensity. This is something that through different, whether maybe it's CrossFit or, different styles of training, the more of the group type facilities and things, it's kind of always intensity. Talking specifically kind of to the person that's maybe just getting into resistance training or just getting into moving on a consistent, regular basis, would you just kind of talk about intensity, maybe why it's important at times, maybe like what intensity is, what it looks like, just kind of like pick that apart a little bit, speaking a little bit more to the beginners, to the intermediate listeners.
Yeah, well, what I'm about to say applies to everybody. It doesn't matter if you're beginner, intermediate, advanced. You can be a professional athlete. Doesn't matter. Intensity is how hard you work out. Okay. The dose of intensity needs to be appropriate for you. Okay. It's just like medicine, right? If a doctor gives you a prescription drug, more isn't necessarily better, and oftentimes will kill you, and less might not work at all. When it comes to intensity, more won't get you there any faster. Less won't get you there any faster. You need the perfect dose. And the perfect dose is determined by your current fitness level, the type of training that you're doing, and of course, somewhat by your goal. Okay. It has to be the right in the appropriate dose. I can't stress this enough. More is not better. More will get you there slower. And if you push the more is better mentality, you'll hurt yourself, burn yourself out, actually cause yourself to lose muscle and go backwards, and even encourage fat storage as your body becomes more stressed and feels that it needs to store more calories because it's under too much stress. So I like to communicate this by using other forms of adaptation. So I talked earlier about how if you go out in the sun, you get a tan, right? That's a form of adaptation. The UV rays hit my skin. My body senses it as a stress. And my body says, okay, we need to darken the skin so that it can withstand this insult. And so if you go out in the sun over and over again, you can take more and more of a dose without getting a sunburn. Okay, now imagine you live in your mom's basement for the last 3 years. You haven't seen the sun and you go outside. There's an amount of sunlight that'll get you to tan. And then more than that will do what? It'll burn your skin. And it's not much. It's not much if you haven't been out in the sun for a long time. So the intensity has to be appropriate. Now, the question always follows, how do I know? How do I know I'm using the right intensity? Well, here's a gauge: muscle soreness. Now, most people think, oh, if I get sore, that's a good thing. Not really. In fact, I tell people to aim for no soreness or very little soreness. You should, the day or 2 days post workout, feel maybe a little soreness. And it's the kind of soreness you have to search for. So you have to be like, I worked out my arms and I don't know if they're sore. And then you kind of got to stretch them and push on it. Be like, oh, I think I feel something. Okay, that's an appropriate level of soreness, or none at all. Now, if you're this kind of sore where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm sore to the touch. Holy cow, I can't walk. You went too hard. And I don't care what you did. You went too hard. Because sometimes people are like, oh my God, I just did 2 sets of body weight squats and I couldn't walk. They can't possibly be too much. It was too much for you. Here's another gauge. You should feel more energized and more, you should feel better right after your workout than you did before. You should not feel like you just got beat up. So I know that we kind of glamorize and romanticize this, like, oh my God, I crawled out of the gym, or I just killed that workout and I had to go lay down, or I could barely drive because my leg was shaking. Oh, that was an intense, crazy workout. That was really amazing. No, the way you should feel after the vast majority of your workouts is, man, I feel like I could do that again. Or, wow, my energy was like, it was okay, but now I feel way more energy. I am ready to tackle this day. Or, holy cow, I feel incredible. That's how you should feel after your workout. You should not feel like you just climbed a mountain or just accomplished some crazy feat of physical performance. If you use that as your gauge and you practice your workouts rather than trying to work out, more often than not, you'll use the appropriate intensity. And what you'll see is gradual, consistent progress. You won't hit a lot of the plateaus that we tend to run into, where we progress really quickly at first and then we hit like a brick wall, or we hurt ourselves, or the workouts become just unbearable.
Love it. All right, Sal. If anybody wants to find out more kind of about everything that you've got going on, if somebody would like to purchase the Resistance Training Revolution book, where can people find the book? Where can people find you? Where can people follow along?
Yeah, so you can find the book anywhere they sell books, or you can go to theresistancetrainingrevolution.com. Of course, you can find me on my podcast, Mind Pump, or on YouTube, Mind Pump Podcast. That's where you'll get all of our free, great content. We do 5 episodes a week. There is one more thing I want to touch on with resistance training, and I like to talk about this because this really blows people's minds. No form of exercise has as positive of an effect on your hormones as resistance training. It's the only pro-tissue form of exercise. Other forms of exercise tend to be anti-tissue. All right, what does that mean? We talked about cardio earlier and how it tells your body to pare muscle down so that you become more efficient at what you're doing to slow your metabolism down. It's literally anti-tissue, anti-muscle. Studies are very consistent on this. Resistance training, in contrast, is pro-tissue, tells your body to build muscle. Why is that important? Okay. Think of all the hormones associated with building muscle, and then think of all the hormones associated with losing muscle. Let's start with men, for example. The most commonly understood pro-muscle hormone in men is testosterone. Okay. Resistance training reliably raises testosterone in all men. All men. Doesn't matter if your testosterone's low, if it's in the middle, if it's high. If you lift weights or you do resistance training with your body or bands, you will reliably raise, for the most part, testosterone levels. Cardio, okay, a lot of people don't know this. Cardiovascular activity has actually been shown in several studies to lower testosterone. Now, it's not going to lower it to points where you might need testosterone therapy unless you abuse it, but it does reliably somewhat lower testosterone. Why? Well, if resistance training is telling my body to build muscle, my body is going to organize its hormones in a way to build muscle. So it says, okay, we need to build muscle. We need more testosterone. If I tell my body to lose muscle because it needs to get better and more efficient at this particular form of exercise, then my body's going to say, okay, it's kind of hard to lose muscle when testosterone's high. Let's lower it a little bit. Let's look at insulin. No form of exercise has shown to improve insulin sensitivity like resistance training. Why? Because muscle is very insulin sensitive. In fact, there's studies done on the severely obese. They don't have them lose any weight at all, just gain a little bit of muscle, and we see significant improvements in insulin sensitivity. Muscle is also a storage vessel for glycogen, which is what we get from sugar and carbohydrates. So we store glycogen primarily in our liver, but muscle also stores a little bit of glycogen. More muscle means we can store more carbohydrates. One of the reasons why it improves our insulin sensitivity. It's also the only form of exercise that has been shown to stop the progression of the things that cause Alzheimer's, probably through this insulin sensitizing effect. You know, Alzheimer's is oftentimes referred to as type 3 diabetes because they're showing that perhaps it's our resistance to insulin that produces some of these effects that cause Alzheimer's. What about growth hormone? We see consistently a raising of growth hormone. What about cortisol? We see cortisol levels becoming more appropriate. And so it often lowers cortisol. Cortisol can eat away at muscle. It balances out estrogen and progesterone in women as well. So if you want more youthful levels of hormones, one of the best things you could do is tell your body to build muscle, because youthful levels of hormones build muscle. So I want to make that point because it's such an important selling point, completely backed by science. This is not just my anecdote by training, all my clients and stuff like that. So if you want to feel younger, have more testosterone, be more insulin sensitive, build a little bit of muscle. It's one of the best things you could do.
Awesome, man. I want to thank you, Sal. I know I reached out to you. I think it was like back in April, May. We had this time set. So thank you for taking some time out of your full schedule to chop it up with myself and the 127 Fit podcast listeners. I want to give a shout out to Katrina. She's your assistant. She's the person that I kind of communicated with to get this all set up. She did an awesome job. So I don't know if she'll listen to this or not, but please, from Quentin to Katrina, just let her know, Sal, that she did an awesome job. So,
all right. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
For sure. 127 Fit podcast listeners, thank you once again for your listening ears. They're always greatly appreciated. I would just ask you guys, as you found great value in this episode of the 127 Fit podcast, just take Sal's episode and share it on all of your social media platforms. And per the usual, I will leave you with Proverbs 24:10, which states, if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. This time, until next time, I'll catch you guys later.